Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Laura Hanson with Connect My Brain. I'm so glad that you're joining us today. We have been having all kinds of great podcasts on reflexes, and now we're going to take a shift. There's some wonderful people that are in my life. I would consider them colleagues, professionals that I just think the world needs to hear from as well. And with that said, I have a very special guest today. Dr. Jerome is with us, and the name of his practice is Thrive Human Care. The name alone gives me goosebumps. I really like the name, but the story is even better. Dr. Jerome's been in practice for 9 years. His main focus is complex, unresolved cases. And you know, I get it because I get a lot of those myself. Mine is primarily pediatrics, but his story, he came by to visit me one day and we just, got into this casual conversation. And I was just so taken back by his story that I really wanted my audience to hear it. So without further ado, welcome, Dr. Jerome. We're so glad that you're here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I'm grateful.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I am too. So, you came, you visited me, we just sat and we were talking, and you never know what's really going on for somebody, what path they've had to walk. And I think your story is incredible. Would you share that with everyone?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I appreciate the opportunity and the invitation. It sounds, I joke with folks, it either sounds like the start to a movie that never got made or my actual life. But I am originally I was born in South Africa and immigrated to the States from Congo in the early 90s. With Zimbabwean and British parents. And we actually came over on asylum status, $100, 2 suitcases, a bipolar grandmother, and a parrot. It started out as a really strange experience. And about a year after I was in the States, we had no money. Very, very poor. My dad bought a bike for $15 at a Goodwill that all 3 of us brothers shared. And my twin brother, being a little bit distractible as one might be at times when they're 8, we were using this bike to ride out into the road in our neighborhood, and one of us would spot and say, "Hey, a car is coming," and the other one would ride out into the road if there was clearance. Well, lo and behold, my twin brother got distracted and forgot to signal me that a car was coming. I pull out of the driveway and I got run over by the car. And that was my first of 6 head injuries. So the first one was at 8. I've had 5 concussions after that, 2 of them being as a result of being hit by a drunk driver at 17 and again at 19, just the wrong place at the wrong time.
Wow.
So what ended up happening is I started having pretty complex migraines at 17. And over the course of the last 20 years, I've averaged about 80 to 100 full-blown migraines per calendar year that are independent of the headaches that I've experienced. And I went to 21 specialists, about 50 traditional providers, spent $100,000 in the first 6 years of my marriage with my wife in my early 20s. And by the time that I got to 26, 27, I've been everywhere, done everything, and finally got a name for it. I got diagnosed with what's called a Chiari malformation. You can have hernias all over the body. You don't want to have one in the brain. It can create some plumbing issues. So for me, long story short is I ended up in this space where I had learned what it was like to be a professional patient, but didn't have a doctor that knew how to support a complex case in a holistic, comprehensive, and really solution-oriented kind of way. So I ended up going into school for chiropractic, and then after that, and actually during that schooling, ended up getting board certified and board eligible in 8 additional areas that specialize in brain rehab and supporting the brain, specifically so that I could support complex unresolved cases, because my journey was as a complex unresolved case.
Well, that is just unbelievable that one individual could go through so much. Yeah. So I want to go more into what you really found for yourself, but there's some nuggets that you bring to mind because I have a child who suffered a traumatic brain injury, and headaches post recovery are very, very common.
Yeah.
And I would also put that in the same category as concussion, whether it's an isolated event or repetitive event. And there's so much research out there. And I do believe that there is a greater light on concussion today than there has been in the past. But I'm not quite sure we're really there yet. But especially for our young people that are experiencing concussions playing sports, and then a year later, et cetera, or whatever the time frame may be, now they're depressed, and people aren't connecting these dots and putting those pieces together. You bring a very important element to your background because you also have an anatomical compromise. Why don't you explain the malformation so that the audience will first go with the anatomical piece? And then let's talk about how your experience has also shown what these types of bops to the head really are doing to people short term and long term. Tell us about the malformation first.
Yeah, absolutely. The visual that I give people is if you think about those tuxedos that had the tails on them, like somebody wears the suit coat, but it's got the tails that hang down. There's this little part of your brain called your cerebellum, or it's a part that it's like the brain's backpack. It's got this little thing behind the brain.
I like that. That's good.
And that backpack has these two little tails that are normally tucked up underneath. So if you put a backpack on and those tails were tucked up underneath the backpack, they should stay above the bottom of the backpack being the cerebellum. But when you have a Chiari malformation, you have what's called the cerebellar tonsils. It's kind of like that thing that hangs down in the uvula and the tonsils in the back of the throat. Well, when you have a Chiari malformation, what happens is those tails end up dropping down below the backpack, hanging down behind the brain or into the area that becomes the brainstem. The problem is that area is supposed to be an opening that lets fluid into the brain and out of the brain. So it's kind of like putting a cork in an open wine bottle that's not supposed to have a cork. Or it's kind of like putting your thumb on top of a hose pipe. And if anybody, the kids nowadays, most kids don't know what it's like to play around with a hose pipe. I grew up with a hose pipe. But if you put your thumb on top of a hose pipe, you don't have to change the pressure of the water in the hose pipe, but you'll absolutely change the pressure of the water as it comes out of the hose pipe. Well, the problem is with that part of the brain being essentially functionally a cork, what ends up happening is it really heavily changes the pressure of what's known as cerebrospinal fluid. It changes the fluid dynamics in my brain. So I always tell people, they're like, okay, you got a hernia, you got this thing in the wrong place, you got a plumbing issue. What does it do? And I said, really, at the end of the day, what it ends up causing is I have a situation where I'm basically pressure washing my brain on a regular basis. And if you start to pressure wash the brain on a regular basis, it can create a slew of things, which is something that we see a lot with folks who have had head injuries or concussions, is when you change the way that the brain structurally is being affected by fluid, by inflammation, by everything that's happening. Like if you have a strong enough head injury that you tear some of the fibers inside of the brain, at the end of the day, the most protected thing in our entire body, secondary to our heart, is our brain. It's not supposed to be touched or affected or pushed or shoved or pressure washed. So for me, long story short, I've got a plumbing issue that causes my brain to get pressure washed. And the consequences of that is it impacts the physical real estate of my brain.
And when people have head injuries, and again, for me, because I saw it at like a very high, severe level with my child, and they drilled a hole in the skull in order to release the pressure. In some situations, they'll start at that level, but if that's not enough, then they'll literally take a cranial plate off of the skull in order to allow that inflammation to calm down.
Yeah.
But that's just the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
The cascade of chemicals, and these are normal chemicals. They're inflammatory chemicals.
Yeah.
But the one I found, and please, contribute more, but the one that I found was most detrimental was glutamate. Glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter. It's absolutely normal. You have it, but it isn't meant to excite everything. Yeah. And over time, if that chemistry part is not regulated, it can actually eat the myelin right off of the nerve, cause the nerves not to heal properly, and lose real estate in the brain. Yeah. So in these situations, we have to help people understand the chemistry part of anatomical issues that you can't necessarily go in and correct, and then trauma. So you're double compounded. So from a chemistry point of view, do you tie your migraines to an inflammatory cascade?
Sure.
And then what do you think about that? What do you do with that?
Yeah, it's a good question, Dr. Laura, because I think one of the phrases that we use in the clinic when we see patients is we tell them you're allowed to have more than one problem. You're also allowed to have more than one solution, right? Because so many of us have come from spaces where it's like, I specialize in fourth digit toenail and that's all I do, right? But I came to you for a foot issue. Yeah, but I only work on fourth digit toenails. And I think it's part of it is understanding that think about getting a paper cut. If I get a paper cut, not only do I know is my skin is going to go through a process, a chemical process, a resource process, but then what am I doing to clean that area? How do I use that finger? What am I doing to make sure that I'm hydrating? What am I doing to make sure that I've eaten food? Because if I want a fingernail to heal from a hangnail, or I want a paper cut to heal, it's not only how I care for the wound, it's what I'm doing from intake for food and nutrition and chemical resources. Yeah. Right? It's like going in and saying, hey, I had somebody drive through one of the bedrooms in my house, and what do I need to do to fix it? Well, part of it is you're going to have to do a lot of recovery and triage on that part that happened, but you can't just sit there and hope that the house rebuilds itself. It's like, what are we going to do to go to Home Depot and make sure we've got resources and lumber and supplies? At the end of the day, anytime the body is dealing with an injury or the brain is dealing with an injury, I don't care if it's a paper cut or you're having an entire section of your skull taken out in order to work with incredible hydrocephaly or increased pressure. We have to talk about what we're doing to maintain the environment, to take care of the injury, to make sure that we're resourced and fueled, that we're engaging our bodies in ways that facilitate healing more effectively. So that being said, like for instance, with my migraine history, what I've had, part of it is I had structural compromise because I had some pretty physical trauma happen. But then also knowing, just like breaking a bone or just like tearing a muscle, the recovery process costs my body a lot. Like all of the things that I was using before to just have a normal day, I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul in all places. And all of the things I would normally have to go, I'm going to think clearly. I'm going to process schoolwork. I'm going to engage in a healthy relationship with a sibling or a parent. All of the things that I would normally have available to me that are allocated to normal activities of daily living have just been robbed in order to help me recover from something really significant.
That is such a good point. That is
right?
such
so
a
we
good
see
point.
fatigue.
Yes.
The research is showing now it's not a question of whether or not you're going to get depression and anxiety following a head injury. It's to what degree are you going to get depression and anxiety. So being able to know that it's more than just the physical impact of the part of your body that was injured. We've got psychological factors. We've got cognitive factors. We've got relational factors, mental and emotional health factors, because we're a whole person trying to reallocate resources. And the bigger the issue, the more we're going to have to reallocate. And it's coming from somewhere, right?
Yes.
So being conscientious of that.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that especially as chiropractors, lots of times I don't think people really understand our background.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so unfortunate that, and I do blame our profession. I don't blame anybody else. I blame our profession. And I have some opinions about that if anybody ever wants to know them, but we funneled ourselves into this pain model, and we funneled ourselves into cracking backs.
Yeah.
And that really has nothing to do with the background that we really do have. And you use the word whole body. I always use the same kind of idea. You are a mechanical chemical brain being. And we were really trained to look at the whole body, not be the specialist on the fourth toenail, but look at the whole body, because that's how you function every day of your life. You don't take your heart out and then let the rest of it, go this way. It is always together. It is always working together. And you have to approach it from that kind of a model so that you can give the body what it expects. I'll often say, I could be really great at the therapies and the special work we do here at Connect My Brain. But if you don't have the right fuel, it's just not going to stick. You can't keep charging the inflammatory condition inside and expect that the body will ever get ahead of, what is it, robbing Peter to pay Paul. So you'll never get Peter ahead, right? So like for me, we do a lot of lab work here. I'm a numbers girl. I like numbers. That's why I like neurofeedback. That stuff just really, it gives me a place where somebody's starting and where they're going to go. And then I can demonstrate quantifiably that there's been some kind of a change. What does your practice? How do you go about it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I agree with the philosophy because, we tell patients life is either sprints or marathons or something in between. And sometimes you get to just take a casual stroll through the park. But if you look at somebody who's going for a race of any type, right, you're going to walk or you're going to sprint, but especially if you're going to do a marathon, a lot of the people that we see are in a marathon space. It's a long run. It's a long effort.
Yeah. That's
That's
right.
not only how you're training, it's what your equipment is. It's especially what your shoes are, how you supporting yourself. But there's not a single person that can do a marathon that isn't so intentional about what they're putting into their body, what they're doing to resource their system, right? There's a reason that they have hydration stations and they have all of these things there, because if we know the process is this big, we automatically, intrinsically know I don't have everything naturally in me by default to do this kind of effort without some sort of support. And sometimes that support will be an at-home exercise. Sometimes that support will be an at-home supplement. Sometimes that support will be, hey, did you know that you actually get to about mile 15 and everything in your body starts to cramp because you're low on all of these things that are really important for you to be able to do something like this for this long. So I think for us, we take a very functional neurology approach of understanding how the brain and body actually work, the structural approach biomechanical from chiropractic. And then we also do a functional medicine side of things of going, hey, the instrument is structurally in great shape and you're doing your best to use it. But the reality is you came out of the factory missing a couple of strings, or you've gone through a couple of things that have compromised some of your resources. Why don't we supplement that? Why don't we support that so that you can actually wake up in the morning and go, oh, I don't feel like I'm completely out of gas, because I don't care how effectively in shape your car is and how good a driver you are. If you don't have fuel in your tank, you're not going anywhere. Right?
Amen. Wow.
So in the other way of thinking about it is we work on the car, which is chiropractic. We work on the driver, which is functional neurology, and then we work on the fuel, which is functional medicine.
That's great. There's one of the labs that I use that looks at micronutrients. It's got the serum and the WBC component of the blood. And I use that analogy of the serum is like when you're getting ready to press the gas pedal. And the WBC is representing how much fuel is actually in your tank. And so if you don't have enough in your tank, every time you have some kind of issue, you're just hitting that gas pedal and it's going lower, lower, lower every single time. So I think those analogies are very helpful for people.
Absolutely.
You know, Dr. Jerome, the other thing that really stood out to me from the initial conversation that we had is you really structure your own schedule in a very particular way.
I do.
And from what I gathered from you, it is to preserve you and to keep you well. And in the culture that we live in today, rest is like a foreign language for people.
Sure.
And I think it's very valuable if we could hear your views on how do you manage your own self? What's your indicator that says this is where Dr. Jerome focuses and then Dr. Jerome takes a break? It almost reminds me of Jesus going off and praying. You know, when I talked to you that day, I was going, he's like Jesus. He literally like goes away. So talk to us about that.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you use that component. I do a whole nother side of the world in outside of the clinic in a field called neurotheology, which is the intersection between neuroscience and spirituality. Andrew Newberg is a great author who's written it. He created the field. But one of the things that I think, especially as providers, like I'm a parent of 3 kids that are 7 and under. I got married when I was 21, and 6 months later took full guardianship of my wife's younger brother, who's now 30. So I started raising someone else's teenager into adulthood and became a grandparent at 36, right?
Wow.
So when I talk about these pieces, I'm talking about it as a parent, as a partner, as a patient, as a provider, but really as a person. Like, who am I as a person taking care of myself? And I think the Jesus piece is a practical example for anybody who's a clinician or a healer, is when Jesus would go out to a quiet, desolate place to be unavailable, it's because the guy is so intentional about taking care of people that the only way that he can rest is to be unavailable. It wasn't that he just had to say no. It's also that he had to be less available to saying yes. Because if somebody's there, the guy's going to say yes. That's the way I am. If you're in my clinic and you need help, and yes is a very normal process for me. So in my world, over the last 5 or 7 years, I have built in more structured stopgaps or ways for not only me to be able to say no or say not yet or maintain a no, but actually it's been more effective for me to build in structure that just limits the amount of times that I can actually say yes. What that means, for instance, is yes, I'm navigating structured scheduling so that I can recover a lot of times, to be transparent, from the migraines that I still experience. I still go through that. I'm navigating my world as a patient every day. I wake up, I'm a patient first and a doctor second, right? So some of the things that I do is I have built-in rest weeks. So instead of keeping the clinic open and working, 50 weeks out of the year, I have gone, this is the quality of life that my wife and I have decided that we want to build. This is what we need as a family. And this is also where I want to stay healthy and above ground for as long as possible. My dad passed at 43, and the 3 generations before him didn't reach 44. So no one in 5 generations in a male has reached 44 in my family, my dad's side, and I'm 39. So I don't get to think about this in terms of I'm going to be 60 and I'm going to make a plan to take care of myself, right? Wow. So some of the really practical ways that I do that for anybody who's curious, at the end of the day, if you don't have a felt sense of rest on a regular basis, I would highly recommend that you get someone who can help you do that, because it's not natural for you. If it was more natural, you'd probably be doing it in some way, so you need support. So what I recommend doing is put 5 hours a week towards an executive assistant. You're going to spend, even if you spend really good money on an executive assistant, you're talking $500 to $600 a month for somebody to support you 5 hours a week. And that 5 hours a week will save you 10 to 15 hours of your own time doing things that you don't need to be doing. They're not skill-based. So for me, one of the things that I have is my executive assistant, Janet, is also my patient concierge. And she is one, she is, I won't say her age, but let's just say that she's not a spring chicken, but she's her age going on 35. She's so full of life and so full of energy. She's amazing. But what she does is she protects my schedule. I have somebody that protects my schedule. She makes sure that I've got the time off that I need, that we're seeing the patients that we need. But a really high level explanation of what my structure is I do clinic weeks that are intensives where I'm with people for 5 days straight. And I will only do one of those a month because I have to be careful of how much it costs me because I'm fully invested with people. If you come in to do intensives with me, you're getting everything that is Dr. Jerome. I do a week that's a non-intensive where I only have 3 clinical days, and then the other days give me chances to do things like this with you and do a podcast, right? Then I have a content week where that entire week is me generating content as a teacher, as a mentor, as a content creator, because my background is in digital animation and film and music. I never meant to be in healthcare, so I'm still a creative. So I function as a clinician 2 weeks out of the month, a content creator 1 week out of the month. And then whether it's a 4 or a 5 week month, the other days are unavailable and I'm resting with my wife and my kids. And that's the high level way. And it took about 7 years to get here. But it's a lot of learning to say no, a lot of learning to have other people who are better at saying no for me. And then making sure to maintain the boundary that when I'm resting, I don't fill that time because I am a productivity-driven person. So my work during that time off is to stay in the quiet space and to not come back and try and help heal people.
Again, I'm in that same state I was in when I was talking to you and you came by my office. There's just something very special about you. There really, really is. So you're there. Took you 7 years to get there. Think of the people that are listening. Where is the person? What are they experiencing right now that you, looking into yourself, decided, this is it, I've got to do something different? Where's that individual where you were 7 years ago or about? Yeah. What are they feeling? What's going to be that red flag wake-up call for them to take notice of their own self?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Dr. Laura. I think the biggest thing is it's going to be fatigue. You can't work through that kind of environment and not experience the consequence of that kind of effort. And here's the thing. I did an executive coaching call with a CEO that I coach because I do brain coaching through other spaces for executives who don't have time to come into the clinic, and we're encouraging them to find time to take care of themselves. And I was having a conversation and I said, look, I know that you've had an incredible life over the last 5 years. You're doing really, really well, but fireworks aren't cheap. They cost you something. So even if you feel like you're having an incredible time, your body doesn't know the difference between the intensity of a Disneyland experience and the intensity of a car accident. Intensity is intensity is intensity.
Yes.
So the thing that I always say for everybody to have a gauge of, am I in the healthiest place that I could be? No, because you're still above ground. So there's an opportunity to become more whole, right? But the reality is asking yourself, what is my relationship with fatigue? And what is my relationship with feeling rested, not trying to rest, not trying to sleep, but feeling truly fueled, filled with energy? So if we use fatigue as a biomarker, then the question becomes, okay, am I fatigued and to what degree? And then how does that show up? What are the consequences of fatigue? Sometimes it can be poor decision making. Sometimes it can be being addicted to work or addicted to some substance. Sometimes it can be really insidious, like you are constantly using levity to neuter the pain that you are experiencing because you don't know how to process how scared you are. It's all over the map. For me personally, you're talking to somebody who has attempted suicide twice and was not successful, fortunately. And my fatigue will show up when I start to get the weariness of the work, and then it starts to become something that's known as depression because it's actually just another name for fatigue, chronic fatigue. Or my anxiety will go up, which is another name for being wound up and feeling like you can't get your foot off the gas pedal. Depression is a brake pedal, anxiety is a gas pedal. So if in your fatigue you start to speed up, you're more prone to anxiety. If in your fatigue you start to slow down, a lot, you're more prone to depression. And I think for me, the thing that I would share with anybody who's on any spectrum, as a patient, as a person, as a provider, if you ask yourself, I don't know if I'm fatigued, or I don't know what the consequences are. One, that's an opportunity to go, there's a chance to increase your self-awareness and do that in a feedback loop with a coach or a spiritual director or a therapist or a counselor. But there's a really easy 3-question framework that I use for myself and with patients, which is it understandable? Is it appropriate? But most importantly, is it sustainable? So is it appropriate that I would end up with depression after head injuries and because I was overworking myself and I was fatigued? Yeah. Is it appropriate for me to be feeling completely uncomfortable and completely overwhelmed by the symptoms and the experiences that I'm having? Yeah, that's an appropriate reaction in that. But what do I want to do moving forward that I feel is sustainable? Because I don't want to sustain migraines. I don't want to sustain my experience with depression. I definitely don't want to sustain the idea of being suicidal. So if I'm saying, is it understandable that I got where I got based on what's happened in my past? Yeah. Is it appropriate for me to check in and go, man, there's a lot happening for me and it makes sense based on where I've been, but where do I want to go moving forward? I can't even ask the question around what I want to sustain or what I don't want to sustain if I haven't even asked myself, am I in a healthy place with regards to my level of fatigue, energy, and my relationship with rest?
Wow, that is incredible. And I so appreciate your transparency, your honesty. I can't even imagine the kinds of people that this is going to reach. It reminds me of 2 things. One, I listened to a podcast yesterday, and one of the things that really what I was reminded of in listening to the podcast is we've got to take this shame or regret emotions off of ourselves over things that we're feeling, because are they appropriate? Does what's been going on match why you might feel that way? And what I'm reminded of is one person I really like is Dr. Caroline Leaf. And she was talking about,
We're both South Africans.
Yes, exactly. You are.
Yeah.
She's great. Boy, and her work was so helpful that I had been exposed to it before my child had a brain injury. So it was, and I got to meet her. I got a picture with her. Oh yeah, it was just great. I think she's marvelous. One of the things that she was talking about in one of her presentations was a lot of the pharmaceuticals that address anxiety and depression really came about like about 1960. And people would literally go into their doctor and they would say, I feel depressed, I feel anxious. And at that time, there was a real shift in approach. And so, okay, don't worry about it. I got something for that. And we stopped asking people, why are you depressed?
Yeah.
Why are you anxious? These are human emotions. God gave us emotions. They're normal. But what we don't want to see is you get stuck on a hamster wheel. Yeah. And that hamster wheel just keeps perpetuating and you don't get off. So these are really good tools and reminders. And boy, I hope there's some people out there that are going to take some action steps. Yeah. Because you're right. If you had done it on your own, or if you could do it on your own, you'd already be doing it. And what are you worth to get some help, get some support? Maybe it is an executive decision. Maybe it's coming to see you. Maybe it's talking to me, whatever the case may be. So I can't thank you enough for sharing. Tell us, what's the best patient for you? What's the best kind of patient if they're out there and they go, wow, I wonder if this guy can help me?
What a great question. My favorite patient to work with is one that's teachable. honestly. I don't mind how complex your case is. I actually don't mind if you feel overwhelmed or if you feel like you're not getting anywhere. If you're willing to be teachable and we can try new things, I have never had anybody come into my office and go, "Yep, I've done this before," because it's just different, right?
Right.
I have a brand of, and this will answer your question. I have a brand of clinical approach called functional psychosomatics. That's my work. And what that means is your psychology impacts your body and your body impacts your brain. And my favorite patient is somebody who says, "Hey, I don't think my brain and my body are communicating as well as they could be. And I'm wanting to be teachable, but what I'm dealing with, everybody says, is either weird or we can't figure it out." So for names of things, I tend to specialize in nonverbal autism or non-speaking autism that tends to have a flavor of aggression or self-harm. I also work with mental health from a chiropractic standpoint and from a body-based standpoint, where we say, hey, look, if you're working with fatigue or if you're working with anxiety and depression and mental health, those may be the consequences of a body that doesn't know how to slow down. So as a functional neurologist, I can help you install a gas pedal if you feel like you're depressed. If you're an anxiety patient, I can help you install a brake pedal if you feel anxious. But we do that through body conversations that wake up the brain. So my favorite patient is somebody who's teachable, but categorically, I love kids that are scary to everybody else. I love adults that are scary to everybody else. I especially love vestibular work, like balance work, like vertigo and things that are happening. And of course, a huge swath of the last 10 years being related to pretty severe head injury, traumatic brain injury, concussion. So this is why we tell people, hey, if you're above ground and you want to do work, we're here. And if you're a complex, unresolved case that feels like even 3 to 5% more traction would be life-changing. We tend to live in that liminal space of making 2-degree changes or 3 to 5% improvement that then will get some real compound interest over time.
That's great. Well, why don't you tell everybody how to get in touch with you?
Yeah. The easiest way is we've got just 2 main portals. My website is, at the moment, until it transitions again for an update that we're doing this year, it's drjerome.com, just drjerome.com.
Jerome is Jerome.
That's it, not a G. Thank you. And the Instagram is one of the places that we just populate some of these ideas. Like, you can go on there and see a full post on the idea around understandable, appropriate, and sustainable. The framework is there.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and that's just doctor spelled out, DOCTOR dot Jerome. So Jerome. So drjerome.com or dr.jerome on Instagram. And then the other thing that I would share, Laura, a lot of folks, especially one, because of my availability, I have an incredible lead clinician who is 40% less than me per hour, who is board certified in everything that I do. But it's kind of like at the salon. I'm the person who's got a wait list, and he's the person who might be more available, but he's brilliant. The other thing that I would tell people, if you look at it and go, hey, I'm not in a position to really come in because we don't take insurance, we're full pay, cash pay. If it's a space where somebody can't come in and see either me or Dr. Schuyler, the social media side of things is giving free resources all the time.
Yeah.
If you go to listennotes.com, listennotes.com is a podcast aggregator. You can put in my name, and I've been on 150 podcasts in the last 8 years talking about these topics, so that's free. And then the other thing that I would say is,
I'm gonna write that down too.
Yeah,
so that was listennotes.com.
Yep.
Okay.
And then the other thing is, so there's tons of free resources, because I know, like me, when I'd spend $100,000, I'm like, I love what you're doing. I got no money left. I get it. Done that. Yeah. So we create a ton of free resources through social and through the podcasts. But then also an intermediate space between that is we're doing a thing called a Year of Becoming Whole. And the Year of Becoming Whole is 50 weeks of content releases around podcasts, video blogs, infographics, visual assets. So every Tuesday for the entire year, people will be getting new resources and new assets, and it costs less than 1 clinical hour for either me or Dr. Schuyler. So if somebody's like, I would love to hear more and learn about how to take care of myself, but I need something that's really feasible financially, free resources, the e-course for a year of becoming whole. But then if I can support you in a clinical way, you can go to drjerome.com and send us a submission request and ask for us to contact you, and we'd be more than happy to support you.
This is great. And tell Dr. Schuyler, we'll get him on a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that way he can talk too, because, I look at things, I'm a very collaborative person. I don't live in a space where I don't think you can't talk to another provider. That's just going to keep somebody in a fear. Yeah. I think it's so important to bridge relationship. It's just so healthy. So I thank you so much for coming on. If you get the podcast, that's terrific. Connect My Brain. And then we are also on YouTube. So what we do is we take the podcast and we put it over there on YouTube. So I have 2 YouTube channels. One is Connect My Brain. That's much older stuff. The Dr. Laura Hanson YouTube channel is where all the podcasts are being posted. So you can go on there, you can see Dr. Jerome, you can see his face, which I think always makes a difference to really connect to someone. Feel free to reach out. If you didn't get any kind of names or numbers, just feel free to either call the office, 678-501-5172, or you can go on connectmybrain.com and send in a request, and we'll be happy to help you out. Again, thank you so much for being with us. You're just an amazing man, doctor, father, husband, and I know you are blessed.
Thank you so much. Likewise, Dr. Laura.